Well, our featured guest tonight on Coast to Coast AM, John Jay Harper, former Department of Defense research scientist. We'll talk with him about Earth changes into 2012, near-death experiences, shamans, and much more on Coast to Coast AM. All right, John Jay Harper, retired electronics engineer, clinical mental health counselor with the U.S. Department of Defense, and he's also the editor-in-chief for Reality Press in California, focusing upon publishing books, DVDs that explore ancient wisdom teaching as they apply to our modern-day search to find the optimal body, mind, spirit wellness strategies. His formal schooling is in electronics and psychology and health sciences, but overall, Dr. Harper states that he's but a shaman in training, seeking to survive the earth changes in 2012 and beyond. He is our special guest tonight on Coast to Coast. John, welcome back. How are you?
Good evening, George. Great to be with you and your wise listeners.
Always a pleasure. I enjoy it when you're on the program, John. You've got so many different topics and so many areas of expertise. You've been at this a long time, huh?
Yeah, it's creeping up on me, too. I think I've been around for about 25 years working on aspects of this. But, this evening I thought what I'd do, George, is just give our listeners a little more background of how I would get into this, from going from a traditional scientist, an engineer with the Navy and Army and Air Force. Actually, I worked for all three branches at one time or another. But I was born in Seattle, Washington, a little over half a century ago, and I was living in a community at the base of Mount Rainier that was near the Auburn, Washington area. And that's a part of the Native American reservation called the Muckleshoot. And this is interesting because the city of Seattle was named after a chief named Sylph, and that's where the term Seattle came from, as many of our listeners may know, in the Pacific Northwest at least. And that tribe that Chief Sylph belonged to was the Suquamish. The Suquamish is you might say, sister group tribe of the Muckleshoot. So it's the Suquamish and the Muckleshoot. They're collectively known as the Salish, or the Coast Salish clan or nation. But why that's important is I grew up with a lot of these kids that were from these reservations, both in the Auburn area and also Kitsap County area, which is in Olympic National Forest. And I was quite blessed. I lived a really idyllic childhood in terms of being able to walk into the old-growth forest and just be that close to nature. And so I would get to know these kids, these Native American children, and I would hear their stories. And there was something that just captured me from a very young age. And so, again, I grew up and I went in the military and I had that career, but that's why I focused on shamanism, and then that led into near-death experiences, and that's where I'm at, why I'm here with you tonight, George.
Excellent, indeed. 2012 also, we're going to talk a lot about tonight, John, where you believe there's going to be some earth changes as well. I see it as a solar celestial event. How about you?
Absolutely. And, from a native standpoint, I was greatly influenced by a man. His name was Kenneth Good Eagle Braniff. Kenneth Good Eagle was someone who was a friend of my father's. I went to school with his son, and the point there is that Good Eagle was a member of the Suquamish tribe. He had been adopted he was an Irishman by blood, but really his heart was Native American. In fact, later in life, he lived to be age 85. And interesting enough, he died on my birthday 6 years ago this month on June 24th. And he really impressed on me the wisdom of the native traditions. And Kenny Good Eagle, as I can refer to him now, he was a graduate of the University of Washington in anthropology, and he went on to serve in the U.S. Navy in World War II in the South Pacific aboard a destroyer. But when he came back from that, he actually had a dual life. He had 30-year careers in the U.S. Navy as a civilian electronics engineer, and we both served in the same facility at Keyport, Washington. But Good Eagle always told me that there was going to be a time that these earth changes would magnify, and that I was to, sensitize myself to these. He didn't really lecture me. He just would leave these little gems, of wisdom on me over about a 35-year period. But I spent a lot of time with him up in his cabin up in north central Washington State around Ellensburg a few years before he passed. And he told me, he says, John, he looked at me, the sun was setting, George, one evening, and we were standing there looking at the sunset, and he said, and he looked at me, he says, John, he said, I hope I did right by my family, and I bought this property in time, because I don't know if I'm far enough inland, and that's about 150 miles inland. Yeah. That really startled me. So, I wanted to say that Good Eagle really needs to be given the credit, because he's the one that started me on this journey of looking at earth changes.
Did you see the picture of the uncontacted tribe there in the Amazon?
Yes, I did, in Brazil, right?
Incredible, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. This is phenomenal that this could be coming about in our day and age, and just think of what we might learn from some of their traditions and shamans.
All right, John, let's get into some of the Hopi work as well, and some of the other work of the shamans. In your experience with shamans, did you ever come across the good ones and the bad ones?
Well, there's those who, as in any profession, just talk the talk and don't walk the walk, right? And so when you meet someone that has the integrity to discipline themselves to be a medicine person or a healer, because that is the focus of their work, not just visionary trance to bring in information, but also to help their community live, holistically, solve disputes, be the wise people, the wisdom keepers of their tradition. And what I find is that, you can sense when you're in the presence of power, and we're dealing with energy. That's what this is about. We're talking about people who can sense the higher order vibrations and bring that information down through them, and then translate the symbols that are given to you in that state of mind, which we call trance, and make it understood to the local people.
Well, I have found the same thing, John, that the good ones are good and the bad ones are bad, but that's probably the same with just about everything.
Yeah, exactly. And, the goal, the native tradition, a lot of them will say, the goal of our life is to become a real human being. And what does that mean? It really means the same things that you and I and our listeners would want. Ideally, we want a long life with full health, full power as long as we can, and also, though, understand that this is not the only life, that there's a life hereafter, and that we need to focus on that perhaps as much, or if not more at times, than the events that are going on around us, because this is the chaos around us that really doesn't lead a lot of times to anything of value, and we tend to focus on, the Polynesians have a saying that says, we're sitting on a whale fishing for a minnow most days.
Well, that's so true, and you're right. I mean, we should make this life for the people we care about the best we can, prepare ourselves for the other side. It's not to say let's give up early on this one,
no,
but there really are two different ways to approach this.
That's right, and we can talk about that perhaps a little bit, but it's important to know that there's an extra body, there's an astral body, soul body, that needs to be nourished, and that's something that doesn't come up in discussions, in non-traditional societies. We need to understand that we do have a doppelganger, a double spirit, a soul, and this energy that we have in this body is extremely important. This consciousness that we have can be transported or transcended to that other body only through conscious will. And this is something we need to understand that the shaman focuses on doing. It's called soul retrieval, in fact.
The Mayans, the Egyptians, the Hopis, they all seem to understand metaphysics. They all seem to understand what could very well be something bigger than what most of us think. How did they all do that? How did they all come about learning that?
Well, when you get to meet some of the native traditional wisdom keepers, first of all, that relationship sometimes takes a long, long time to cultivate, and you always have to sort everything out. You have to use your own discernment when you're dealing with these mythologies, with these stories that are being told around the campfire, because we get embezzlement. We get embellishment as well as embezzlement.
We don't want embezzlement
in our society. Yeah, and that's a white man slip, not a Freudian slip. And So I think the important thing is to realize that some of these traditions go back thousands of years, and they truly do. Like the Hopi, for example, who came perhaps out of the Aztec community. I mean, what we find is a consistent, coherent story in many of these